All right, well, we got swamp coolers, fans going, everything trying to stay cool because now it's hot. You know, it's either too hot, it's too cold, or we're bitching about something. Anyway, we're going to go ahead and skin the bottom of this wing. The other wing's already skinned, it's riveted in place, and we want to get this done so we can move forward. I finally got enough of this area cleaned out again to where I've got back to my build table and have a little bit of room to move. So anyway, what I've already done, wing is already propped up in place. Our front spar is 90 degrees to the table, and we're level, or at least coplanar all the way down, front and back. So the wing is oriented where it needs to be to get the bottom skin on. Now what I've already done, and it's a little bit different when you're scratch building, the plans show a reference off of rib 4, and there's a big no rivet zone in rib 4 where there's reinforcement attachment points for struts and things. But we're not going to reference off of rib 4 now. Like I say, I've already got the other wing all skinned and the bottom skin riveted in place. It's sitting outside, so I'm taking measurements off of it. But what I've done is I've laid out center lines on each of my ribs and on our rear spar pieces and our fuel tank pieces. So we don't really need these down the ribs until later when we get ready to drill and rivet them. But with those already marked, I don't have to worry about that later. Now, what I'm going to do is, like I say, they reference off of rib 4 in the builder's manual from what I understand. I'm going to reference off of rib 1 right here. And the reason being is that's how I can reference my overhang from this end. I'm going to leave this a little bit long, but I can reference off of this rib and off the front edge of the front spar, and then everything else is straight in line. One thing that you run into on ribs is you normally end up with a little bit of bow in these ribs. And when I set these up, normally you'll take an edge tool or a marking tool like this. These are shop built. I've got a couple of these. And you run your little Sharpie in there and lock them in. And then you can run them along the edge of your ribs, and that will give you a center line. And you can adjust it to whatever you want by just moving the little finger back and forth. So normally that's probably the easiest way to mark it. You can just go along if you've got a steady hand and use your finger as a reference and run your line across there. On the back rib, I went ahead and used this little tool so they end up in the center. For these, and what I've done so I know where my rivet lines are, is off of the front point, I've drawn me a line there and then taken a square and squared up off the front, made that mark, and then I've just put a little mark on the front rib, on the nose rib, so I know where I want to start my rivet line coming back on each of these ribs. And they're not aligned at all, it's just wherever they landed. Why, that's how I made my mark, and as long as they're sitting in that position, that mark's not going to vary. But I made sure my ribs were all straight enough that I just took a rule and just ran my line down off of that. So what I did to get them was I just clamped them in place on the front just with a spring clamp, and then I've marked the center on the back, and I was able to just run my Sharpie mark all the way up, and every one of the ribs is very close to being centered up exactly the way it should be. I'm really happy. So that tells me that my ribs were straight. I got all the bows out of them when I straightened them out. So that's what I've done there. What I'm going to do is just unroll the skin that goes on top, and it's initially cut, and I think we're 330 centimeters to the edge out here. It overhangs this center rib a little bit. So I'm going to make sure I've got extra material there and just let it run long, because both ends will get trimmed to do it. But to get these rivet lines laid out, or the rivet holes laid out, why, I'm going to run them a little bit long on both ends just to make sure, but I'm going to use that as my reference point. So I had previously cut this so it's the right width, or very close to the right width, and it will just unroll on here. and we're 330 centimeters, 330 millimeters off of the center line of this rib. So since we've got plenty of material, if we come off of that point, and I've already double checked this, so that we've got our 330 off of this side, that will give us plenty to trim back when we get that far. And we're just going to line off the front of this. We'll tape it down with some duct tape once we get it pretty close to being in position and double check everything. And 330 is our farthest point out there. We're about 332. I think we've got lots of material on the other end for our wingtip. Yeah, we've got lots of material hanging out there. So then we can take our fancy little Gorilla Tape, and the only reason I'm using up this Gorilla Tape is because I've had it here for a while, and I'm out of regular, inexpensive silver duct tape. We'll just tape that in place in a few places along the way. Okay, so once we've got that skin in place, we can go ahead and mark our ribs. And that's basically all I'm doing this afternoon, is just getting a layout, because once I've got the rib layout, I can go ahead and figure out the spacing, and we can drill them accordingly. Pretty straightforward. And like I say, I was very happy that everything was as straight as it was. See, it'd probably be a little bit better if I would spring clamp the back end of these. Just about like that. All right, now there's all our rib locations marked. I'll have to go along and mark the top spar, or where it hooks into the front spar, and then we'll have to measure out where our spacing is for our two fuel tank bays for our reinforcements in there. They set right in here. So I think while it's mounted right here, I'm going to go ahead and figure out my rivet spacing front and rear, and we'll get that part of it laid out before we disturb anything. And then we'll have to figure our markings for our front spar. We've got a big no rivet zone up here at rib 4, right here, from here to there, because it's got extra reinforcement goes there, so we're not going to rivet that, even though we'll lay it out. And we'll do that for now, and that's kind of where we're at. And rivet spacing is going to be in the center of that front spar, so we'll mark those and then work back off of them, as I believe what we're going to do. Those are, well, we do our first rivet right there, and then we go front and rear off of those. And we've got 12 rivets with an A4 pitch, or 12 rivets A4 with a 50 pitch. And we'll double check before we drill anything, make sure we're not interfering with any of our little crimps that are here along the way, and figure out where they go. Once we get this end done and that end done, we can run straight edge down and mark each of them from there. Is about the easiest way to do it. Off of the center line of that front row of rivets, we come back 35 for our first rivet. And if we were to take a long straight edge, sorry if I'm blocking your view here a little bit. Say that's just about right. My son and I were just discussing not having enough room, and that seems to be one of my main problems with doing anything on this airplane, because when I feel like working on it, either it's stacked full of everything, stacked full of crap, and I can't get to anything, or it's the middle of winter and cold and I've got stuff stored back here, or any of another number of other problems. So consequently, I haven't gotten this done. And they talk about you can build a plane any place you've got, and I do believe that's true, but I also believe that unless you have a workspace that's clean and organized, which I'm not noted for, as you well know, any of you that have followed me for very long, why you can accomplish an awful lot, but pretty soon you reach a point where you need more space. And I've had this wing skin, this lower skin, cut and ready to be fitted like we're doing today for several months. And today was one of those days that to accomplish anything, and now it's gotten hot out, so I'm not really inclined to be doing too much out in the heat. But to accomplish anything on this, or be able to work on this at all, I originally had this wing sit on the table, just like it is now, and I had to take it off, break down that setup, and pull the other wing that's almost completed down off the wall and move it outside. And that's where it's sitting right now. Well, I'll have to move it back in a bit, but it's about 90 degrees outside. So I'm really going to enjoy going back out there to move that back in, because it's going to be hot. And like I say, if I want to do anything or take measurements off of it, I have to go out in the heat and do it, just because I don't have enough space. So if you don't have room to move around and room to breathe, why, pretty soon things will grind to a halt, and that does not help your project continue forward. Okay, so that's the front of that. I think we'll just move this up here. Okay, now from the center of this bottom rib, which is still going to be another 10, is going to be center. Now it looks like this sheet is shifted that way just a skosh all the way down, so that's all right. We've got our reference marks there. And now in between each of these, what do we got? We've got from there we want to go up another 50 on both ends from that center line. That one. Okay, so that's that. Now we've got, what is it, 12 rivets on it. Pitch 50. Yeah, so we've got 12 rivets total. Before I get any farther than that, I'm going to go out and compare it to my other wing and make sure that these distances look right and everything before we get any farther. So we'll come back in a few minutes here. Okay, that layout is right. For a minute I thought it wasn't, but it is. So then let's take a rivet spacer. And we're going to do 12 rivets. Should give us about a 50 spacing, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Yeah, except we can't get that many. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So rivet fan won't go wide enough, so I guess we have to manually do it. The biggest problem that I run into is getting in a hurry, not going back and measuring things 8 dozen times, because that's when I find that I screwed up. So this one I measured it way more times than I felt that I should have had to, but I was not getting it. And ultimately it is right, but it didn't take me that much longer. You know, I spent another 10 minutes probably just in layout, that double checking what I'd done, because it did not look right to me, even though it was. you really do need a place where you can walk all the way around your work table. Okay, now I know it may not be that easy for you guys to see, but all of those rib locations are marked out. Now I'll go back and verify the positioning a little bit of it, and then we'll figure out our spacing for this rear rib and then the front rib. And once that's done, we'll probably take it out to the, I'll have my little plywood table set up. And make sure we're not interfering with any of our crimps there. Which we're not. And then we'll go ahead and drill and we'll drill these. And then we can go back and drill them to match the rib once we get that perimeter done, and we'll have to mark our no rivet zone up on rib 4. And then we'll go back and drill them and affix them to the bottom of the wing skin. Then once we get that done and everything else laid out, then we can go back at the same time that I've got it out on the table. The first time we'll trim these and do our cutouts on the end, do our initial cut down on the end. And then it'll be ready to open them up to the proper rivet size and go ahead and rivet them in place. So anyway, that's about all I'm going to do today. I'll probably go back and fit these little pieces that are already set up and drilled for this, put them back in place for any place we have to notch here on the backs of these to clear this skin. And then once we get that done, before we move it off of its position here, we'll go ahead and do our bottom rear trailing edge there and get that done. Then we'll go back, spin it around, and do our nose ribs. So anyway, hopefully you find that a little bit useful. Comments, suggestions, leave them in the comment section for me below, guys. And as always, thanks for taking the time to watch.